So this video is an introduction of my current research and how useful a Jungian orientated framework is in developing an appreciation of visionary art. I established that there is a deficient understanding of the genre of visionary art in critical art theory. In response to these inconsistencies, I suggest that the language within analytical psychology could potentially provide a more coherent explanation of the genre. Alongside this assertion, I also propose a new way of categorizing visionary artworks using a gradation scale based on an important historical text by Hanz Prinzhorn, a text which Jung himself possessed in his personal library. The term visionary has been used as an adjective to describe several prophetic, genius, and spiritual artworks, but the term is not effectively defined in art term glossaries or on mainstream platforms. This exclusion is a curious omission and needs addressing. The term visionary is defined in the Oxford Dictionary as original and showing the ability to think about or plan the future with great imagination and intelligence, and has been applied to artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Hilma af Klint, Francisco Goya, and, more recently, Alex Grey. On the surface, these artists have truly little in common, so why is this term used to describe their unique and challenging creations? Visionary and visionary art seems to be an umbrella term to describe any art from an artist who is talented and influential. Yet, when researching the genre within critical art theory, it becomes apparent that the term is defined on multiple platforms quite differently. This inconsistency is unsatisfactory and will be addressed throughout my videos. Within contemporary art, there are two genres that use the term visionary art, and have attempted to find the category: outsider art and fantastic realism. These categories, however, have opposing viewpoints, a black and white perspective on what visionary art is and who can create it. So a key source that highlights the genre according to outsider art is the British publication titled Raw Vision. Their website defines outsider art as referring to any artist who is untrained or with disabilities or suffering social exclusion, whatever the nature of their work. The online source also claims that the outsider art label has, over the years, become an umbrella term for such styles as art brut, folk art, intuitive art, and visionary art. The founder, John Mazos, states that visionary art is like intuitive art, which are fairly general terms. Used together, they can include much urban folk art of the third world, as well as works based on religious experiences and visions. This definition is hollow and provides the reader with no information. The exclusion of mentally healthy people from this category is absurd and reiterates the general assumption that great art can only be made by mentally unstable individuals. So Daniel Wojcik, a professor of English and folklore studies at the University of Oregon, describes how there are several scholars and promoters that acknowledge the problematic nature and inaccuracies of the outsider art label. He states, "Those who condemn the idea of the outsider art genre argue that the term is dehumanizing, ultimately reinforcing notions of artists as other, and marking individuals as pathological or primitive in relation to normal people and culture." He strongly suggests that outsider art is a classification that has been defined and imposed upon by individuals, by collectors, art critics, and dealers. Those who have been labelled as an outsider artist rarely have any contact with each other and usually have little interest in defining their own work in such terms. So Colin Rhodes is a British writer, artist, and educator who works primarily in the areas of modern and contemporary art and visual culture. Rhodes is a key figure in the discussions of outsider and visionary art and has published several articles in the Raw Vision journal. In an essay titled Exquisite Vistas, Rhodes provides us with a loose definition on the genre, describing it as paradoxically both revelatory and hermetic. He continues, "It contains in varying degrees a manifest content that defines the singular world of its creators, but it surrenders meaning only reluctantly." In this essay, Rhodes also states how difficult it is to comprehend visionary artworks. Its subject matter is sometimes perceived as difficult or unrefined. That is because it's without pretense. He continues, What is required of the viewer is to meet such work in a neutral place. They require recognition of oneself in otherness. The enigmatic nature of this description adds to the confusion surrounding the topic. Rhodes is using metaphorical language to ineffectively explain the category, merely skimming the surface of what is more effectively discussed and described in Jung's collected works. So, similar to the outsider art genre, visionary art, according to fantastic realism, focuses on configuration types that depict an inner psychological or spiritual exploration. However, the director of the Academy of Visionary Art, Lawrence Coruna, states, "From a technical point of view, visionary artists all agree that as a precise rendering as possible is absolutely necessary for vision-inducing works." This point differs drastically from the outsider art genre, as noted in the following statement by the American Museum of Visionary Art. "We believe that there is a great power in not knowing what will or won't work, and we adhere to the importance of not being immersed in rule-based systems which can cloud one's vision." The two genres seem to share an appreciation of artworks that attempt to visualize an individual's inner world, but differ drastically on what they believe is appropriate technical skill and aesthetic quality. So Coruna is an artist and a writer who graduated from the University of Toronto with a philosophy degree specializing in hermeneutics. His text, The First Manifesto of Visionary Art, attempts to define and retrace the development of the genre. He states that the visionary artist is someone who attempts to show what lies beyond the boundaries of sight, through dreams, trance, or other altered states. The artist attempts to see the unseen. In private correspondence, Coruna states that during the 1990s, himself and the artist Alex Gray began to use the term visionary to describe their art that followed in the footsteps of the Vienna School of Fantastic Realism. Interestingly, Coruna emphasizes in his manifesto that the theories explored by Jung inspired the visionary art movement by urging artists to reveal symbolic imagery by exploring their unconscious. He states, "The fantastic realists had Jung's latest discoveries to spur them on to new dimensions of consciousness." Likewise, the visionary artist Otto Rapp, who runs the Visionary Art Gallery website, describes how the fantastic realists were occupied with presenting the conscious and the subconscious world as an inseparable whole. He continues, "Their philosophy is of a dualistic nature, echoing the philosophies of Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and the psychological theories of Freud and Jung." This point is essential in understanding the influences that guided the art movement. However, the use of the Freudian terminology, subconscious, suggests that writers pushing this movement have little knowledge in the studies and theories of Carl Jung. So Kerry Noonan and Stephen Waymeyer, professors at Champlain College, Vermont, state that visionary art as a category needs more examination. They stress in their article, Re-envisioning the Visionary, the fundamental incomprehensibility of the category and the mysterious nature of the visionary artist. They state, "Visionary art, which sounds better than outsider art, but which once again seems to imply really beautiful things made by really interesting people we would never deign to invite to dinner. This category, as defined in art scholarship, proves less useful when closely examined." So this point is very valid, as the term is used interchangeably to describe a multitude of art styles. The title visionary art seems to be an umbrella term for any creation that is brilliant, intuitive, spiritual, or guided by a psychogenic experience. In a basic Google search, the term is immediately associated with such phrases as transcending the spiritual world, portraying a wider vision of awareness, mysticism, and spirituality. These initial descriptions are inadequate, as it implies a necessity for an artist to understand mystical or occult practices. An online search of visionary art is problematic. While researching through open-source dictionaries, encyclopedias, and online glossaries of art terms, it quickly becomes apparent that visionary art is not a category of art on mainstream sources. What is of great interest is the exclusion of the term from online glossaries of art terms. From world-renowned art museums such as the Tate Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and the National Gallery. The term is also omitted from online open-source encyclopedias and dictionaries, such as the Oxford Concise Dictionary of Art Terms, Merriam-Webster Dictionary, Cambridge Dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, and Britannica. It is a curious omission which implies a lack of research and knowledge on the topic, which this research will attempt to rectify. With my research, which will be presented in these videos, will attempt to rectify the confusion surrounding the term visionary art by tracing the roots of outsider art and fantastic realism. Due to the connection with mysticism, hermeneutics, and spirituality, I'll be using a Jungian conceptual framework to understand this phenomenon in a psychological perspective. Mysticism and spirituality are key topics which Jung addresses in his writings. Jung himself states, "I am first and foremost an empiricist, who was led to the question of Western and Eastern mysticism only for empirical reasons." Jung referred to the spiritual side of man's personality as the spirit of the depths, which exists in contrast to the spirit of the time. The latter phrase refers to the set of ideas, beliefs, and aims that is typical of people in a specific culture within a particular period of time, whereas the former phrase refers to the fantastical realm of the unconscious, the source of creativity, inventions, and new ideas. Erich Neumann, a former student of Jung, describes, "In the group, as in the individual, two psychic systems are at work, which can function smoothly only when they are attuned to each other. The first one is the collective consciousness, the cultural canon, the system of culture's supreme values toward which its education is orientated. But side by side with this is the living substratum, the collective unconscious, in which new developments, transformations, revolutions, and renewals are at all times foreshadowed and prepared, and whose perpetual eruptions prevent the stagnation and death of a culture." In recent years, Jungian scholars have shown an increased interest in creativity and its connection to the imagination, fantasy thinking, symbolic representations, and even the individuation process. This interest may have sprung from the publication of Jung's Liber Novus, the Red Book, a manuscript-style text that documents Jung's self-experimentation, his confrontation with the unconscious. This text enters the field of analytical psychology late, yet represents itself as a foundational text. It was a personal masterpiece from which Jung formulated all his theories and to which he returned to study for the rest of his life. The topic of the visionary artist has also been discussed amongst other analysts, such as Robert Matthews, who published a journal article titled An Analytical View of Wholeness in Art. This article is a comprehensive exploration into Jung's concept of the visionary mode of creativity. He states that the term visionary can be applied to the artist who can act as a conduit for a new vision arising from the primordial experience within. Within this article, Matthews attempts to describe the creative process according to Jung's view of the transcendent function, to illustrate 3 roles of a visionary artist according to Erich Neumann, and to consider the role of the visionary artist in the West at the present. However, by checking his sources and evaluating his conclusions, I found there to be several inaccurate statements, particularly his analysis of Neumann's text, Art and the Creative Unconscious. Craig Stevenson is also another Jungian analyst who has shown a keen interest in Jung's visionary discussion. In his text, C.J. Jung on Psychological and Visionary Art, Stevenson gathers Jung's lecture notes on the French Romantic poet Gerard de Nerval's visionary literary work, Aurelia. Along with the presentation of Jung's notes, Stevenson himself provides an informative and biographical introduction. He describes the visionary artist as an individual who has aspired to transcend the limits of what was actual and artificial by descending into the sensual and sublime profundity of nature, as well as intuitively going down through reverie of dreams into the ancient pagan depths of the mind. The concepts within analytical psychology has the potential of providing a more nuanced understanding of the genre of visionary art within critical art theory and vice versa. This research aims to provide both fields with a slightly more enhanced understanding of the genre of visionary art. So alongside this exploration, it is also relevant to consider how the wide-ranging configuration types fit into the discussion. I will be proposing the scale of creative achievement, a gradation scale based on the characteristics of pictorial configuration. The scale I will be proposing begins at the 0 point and ends at point 4. The categories are taken from Prinzhorn's text and are labelled as follows: unobjective and unordered scribbles, playful drawings with a predominant ordering tendency, playful drawings with a predominant copying tendency, visual fantasies and increased symbolic significance. This gradation is based on the increasing complexity of the configuration and the artist's ability to express their individuality. So this proposal is based on an important historical text by Hanz Prinzhorn, Artistry of the Mentally Ill, from 1921. This text is known as the book that launched the field of psychiatric art and is one of the first texts that appreciated the aesthetic achievements of mentally ill patients. Prinzhorn declares, "Creative power is present in every person, and we have to look on tradition and training as external cultural embellishments of the primary configuration process, which under the right conditions can break forth in every person." Prinzhorn does not directly assign the title Scale of Creative Achievement to the 5 categories of recurring configuration types. However, he states, the more completely a picture's individual expressive content ripens into a more commonly understandable and communicative configuration, which it does independently of skill, the higher we will rank it as a creative achievement. He does not measure the drawings by their artistic merit, but instead attempts to understand them through a psychological lens. The appearance of this book created great excitement amongst artistic circles, triggered by Max Ernst and Jean Dubuffet. The text was originally published in German, so Ernst was the only surrealist who was able to read the text and to understand its revolutionary significance, not only for psychiatric investigation of schizophrenic art, but for the development of modern art and aesthetics. Ernst brought the book to Paris and presented it to Paul Eluard in the year it was published. The writer, John McGregor, describes how it is not impossible that this was the first copy of the book to reach the surrealist circle in Paris. Interestingly, the fantastic realist Karuna states that Ernst was among the forefathers of visionary art. Likewise, Prinzhorn's publication influenced Jean Dubuffet and his advancement of the art brut movement and in turn outsider art. Contemporary theorists of outsider art have made this connection, such as Daniel Wojcik and Colin Rhodes. Wojcik states simply that Dubuffet was influenced by Hanz Prinzhorn's 1922 Artistry of the Mentally Ill. Rhodes, however, informs us that Dubuffet could not read the German text, so his interest sprung solely from the rich illustrations. The lack of consideration of Prinzhorn's psychology and textual research could potentially explain why definitions of outsider art and visionary art have become muddled. It seems relevant to refocus on Prinzhorn's text and images to bring some clarity to the topic.